England face Switzerland in the quarterfinals of Euro 2024. A tough matchup, there is no doubt, especially considering England's form and how well Switzerland have been playing in recent matches. But this is how I believe England should set up to beat the mighty Swiss. Let's talk about England's formation, because clearly something is not working. One of those things is the lack of progression from the centre-backs or the defenders through into the higher areas of the pitch, and that's for a couple of reasons. We know that Phil Foden likes to come inside, and that means that Kieran Trippier needs to occupy this left-hand side, but he can't do because he's not comfortable, so England essentially have no left flank. So the ball gets recycled round to this right-hand side into, normally, Kyle Walker. Now what ends up happening here is he plays it over to Bukayo Saka, but because there aren't too many options, there's not too much movement out on this right hand side, Saka needs to retreat. And in retreating it means that England's right hand side isn't really occupied either. So Saka returns back to a normal position, Walker recycles the ball back round, and then it's the turn of the centre midfielders. Because they're not receiving the ball quick enough and because they're not making quick enough movements, what ends up happening is they drop just a little bit deeper. And when they drop a little bit deeper, the rest of the opposition team follow them, which means that there's a disconnect between the forward line and the back line. Harry Kane becomes a little bit isolated, so he comes searching for the ball as well. And what ends up happening is when the forwards drop and the defenders push forwards along with the centre midfielders not really pushing on as well, you get average positions that look like this. The entire England side quite clustered together, still quite compact, but also not able to get any kind of progression through the side. There is no balance from the left or right flanks, and it just means that England are a bit of a mess. So clearly, something needs to change. Now let's look at Switzerland, and I want to emphasise the contrast between the two sides. One side in England is a complete mess, a lack of foundation, a lack of balance, and a lack of understanding as to where they want to go. And then we look at Switzerland. This is how Switzerland set up. So they have their 3-4-3 formation. They play a narrow attacking trio, which allows them to be really compact in the centre of the pitch. Looking towards their defence, they have a seriously good back three partnership of Fabian Schär, Akanji and Rodriguez. Jan Sommer isn't too bad either, and then you've got the wing-backs in Ndoye and Arbischer. Arbischer in particular is a dynamic powerhouse who is really aggressive, and in fact, along with Granit Xhaka, who is their main playmaker, and Remo Freuler, who is able to really do a lot of the gritty work, this Switzerland side have a good mixture of quality, class, but also workman-like qualities, really able to be that little bit more aggressive, and it's actually the aggression down this left hand side which has shown them to be a proper threat, especially with Arbischer moving forwards, Vargas having high energy, and Rodriguez helping to really push that left hand side through. It gives Switzerland a really good edge, but most of all they have a balanced progression through the back of the pitch. They have the ability to find their main talisman, and they also have runners off of the ball who are willing to do a lot of hard yards. Put all this together and Switzerland are one of the surprises of the tournament. A proper good side, tactically well trained, everybody knows their job, and they look like the real deal. So a serious problem for England. One of the things that Switzerland does really well is prevent the progression of the football through the centre of the pitch, and they do this by really condensing the space. So you have a front three that's willing to be really narrow, compact and press. You've got two wing-backs who are able to hold out in those wide areas, two sitting holding midfielders in Freuler and Xhaka, and then you have their back three. Now look at how close the front players are to the back three. There's nearly no space to play in between. There's a limited amount of space for these Italian players to really play through the middle, and yet that's some of the only options that they have available to them. So as we see this play progress, you can see how it starts to break down. Here you have the three forwards, you've got the two holding midfielders, you've got the two wide men, and of course you've got the back three. But just look how everyone is set, look at how ready they are, look how high up the pitch they are, and this is going to make progression for England so much more difficult. And if we look at the way that Italy play, you've got a player drifting through into the centre of the pitch, which seems fine, but just look at how quickly Granit Xhaka really springs into action. And then he has organised this. He has set off the press. Now, once he goes, he's the trigger for the rest of his team to start to really converge on this space and stop Italy from playing out. And then from the moment Xhaka goes, you've then got 1, 2, 3 players ready to converge after the pass is made. And all of a sudden, you've got Switzerland with the ball back. A brilliant press, a brilliant ability to win the ball back, and it's going to make England's life through the middle of the pitch so much more difficult. Let's take a look at another example, and this is what really concerns me. This is from an Italy goal kick. You can already see the Switzerland press beginning to initiate here, with Arbischer ready to push up against the Italian right back. And just look at the front three of Switzerland here. You've got 1, 2 and 3, and they're marking the Italian centre backs and their centre defensive midfielder, essentially taking them out of the game entirely, which means that the right back is completely isolated unless he has some major movement from the rest of his side. And the reason this really concerns me is that this reminds me a lot of England and the way that England build up. If you think about the slowness and the pace of the play that England have, I can see them doing exactly this. Look at how spread out Italy are. England do this. Look at Declan Rice in this position being isolated. Obviously it's not Declan Rice, but I can see this exact same thing happening. And remember what I mentioned about the distance between the forwards and the defensive line? Well, look at the distance here. If England do not change the way they progress the ball, this same thing will happen. And Switzerland did this to Italy on a number of occasions. In fact, Italy, I thought, did a pretty decent job of trying to play out, but the Swiss press was just far too much. The midfielder drops deep for the ball down the line, and what happens? You've got the left centre-back in Ricardo Rodriguez ready to back up that Switzerland press, continuing the pressure. You've got a player moving into space to try and cover the pass that's into midfield. You're then forcing him round towards the back, and I can again see England doing this, retreating, regressing in possession, not being able to progress the ball forwards. In the end, he plays an extremely risky pass past 3 Switzerland players. How many times are you going to see England play that ball around the corner in that right back slot? Not too many times. How many times are you going to see an England player sprint into space to try and give an option? Again, not too many times. We haven't seen it this tournament. This is a major red flag for England, and if they're looking at this, I think they need to pay attention. He moves into space and it allows for a better pass. It gets moved on to Chiesa, who's ready to play a 1-2. But again, look at Granit Xhaka here. He's already there marking the player. You've got another mark. You've got another mark. They are ready to really put that pressure on. And if England, as I said, are not careful, the 1-2 gets played here. If they're not careful, it's going to be a long, long day. There's 1, 2, 3 Switzerland players marking one player. Look at how difficult that is to try and play out. And England's lack of pace in their game, it's only going to exasperate this. I do believe it's going to make it so much worse. Again, they get played through, it tries to move on, and in the end, it doesn't come to anything. And Switzerland recover possession. The ball is right here. They recover possession, then recycle it round. It just is so difficult to play through if England do not change something. So what actually needs to change? Well, after looking at England's lack of progression and the way that the Swiss have their press down to a T, I believe that England's 4-2-3-1 system might be the major hindrance for them going forwards. In fact, I'd go as far as to say that if they set up against Switzerland with their 4-2-3-1 against Switzerland's 3-4-3, I think Switzerland are going to win pretty comfortably. In fact, I don't really think it's going to be a contest, and that's for a couple of reasons. Harry Kane is not going to have any impact against these 3 aggressive, proper centre-backs. He's not going to be able to run him beyond, and if he drops a little bit deeper to try and get on the ball, I think that the Switzerland back 3 have no issue with allowing one of their defenders to follow him and stop him from having an impact. This means that he's not going to have too much of a say on how the game flows. And then we look at the midfield. There is a massive imbalance when you compare England's midfield to Switzerland's, and it's just a simple numbers game. With how narrow the forwards go, they have a big opportunity to try and stop England's 2 main ball progressors in Declan Rice and Kobbie Mainoo. This means that if the ball goes to one of the England centre-backs, they're not going to be able to play it into the feet of the 2 midfielders. This is going to lead to the same issue that England have had previously, where they drop far too deep, and the difference and the distance between the actual midfielders and the forwards is going to be far too much. Recycling of the ball through round the defenders is yet again going to be a major issue, and the lack of progression through the lines will rear its ugly head once more. Phil Foden dropping into midfield isn't really going to assist with this, because the numbers that Switzerland have simply are too high, and England then yet again will not be able to utilise that left hand side, forcing the play to go down the right, which we know Switzerland are going to be able to dominate with their aggressive play, not to mention the fact that with the idea of a left hand side not being there, Switzerland are going to be able to overcommit players to one flank. And then when we actually look at the numbers, even if England are able to progress the ball into the midfielders, it's just a simple numbers game. Jude Bellingham could possibly be marked by 2 Switzerland midfielders. The forwards can be on to the other midfielders, which means that passing through the centre of the pitch is just not going to be an option. So something needs to change there. And then you're looking at the wide areas. How do England best utilise these flanks to be able to get the most out of their attacking players? It's a conundrum, but I believe that the formation is something that needs to switch. This is what I would do. I would change England's 4-2-3-1 system and have them opt in for Switzerland's 3-4-3. Now, this has a number of different qualities and attributes that I think would allow England to level the playing field almost when it comes to the tactical approach that both them and Switzerland have. First of all, in pushing out players into being wingbacks, you're not only making sure that there's a bit more balance down both flanks, but you're also allowing for a bit more defensive solidity when it comes to trying to stop Switzerland's press from both sides. At the same time, you've also got the option for 2 almost attacking midfielders, and this allows for England to have a bit of variety in the way that they go forwards, allowing them to both drop infield to try and stop the likes of Xhaka and Freuler from being able to build up through that midfield area, but also at the same time, instead of doing that, they could really push onto the Switzerland centre-backs. This could initiate some kind of a press, allowing for England to really put them under pressure rather than the opposite happening. And then if they start to recycle down the wings, you've already got pressure on both sides, forcing them to possibly go long. The aerial ability of 2 holding midfielders is then going to allow England to hopefully win the ball back and recycle possession through themselves. What this is also going to help with as well is with England's natural progression through the thirds. It's not only going to help them with a lot of dynamic tactics when it comes to flowing through different areas from a defensive point of view, but playing through the lines I think is going to be a little bit easier. Not only do you have extra passing lanes through the 3 centre-backs, but you've also got the ability to go around the outside. Instead of just having a right back or just having a right winger, you've now got the option for a player to spin in behind or come short. Recycling of possession is always going to be key, but it's also about moving the opposition players. If one of the forwards, for example, was to jump and move on to the right wing back to allow for the left wing back to have a little bit more space and a little bit more time, you've then got a centre midfielder that's open. He can then spin and start to find some of his teammates. It's all about shuffling players across and making sure that you're making the opposition think differently about the way they approach the game from a tactical point of view. At the same time, you've also got the ability for a better matchup in midfield. With 4 midfielders up against 4 midfielders, you're now going to have a better battle in midfield instead of it being that overload situation that we had previously. Harry Kane, if he wants to, can drop a little bit deeper, and then you've got the 5 against 5 if the Switzerland striker decides to drop, and all of a sudden everything becomes a little bit more balanced. You're evening and leveling the playing field to allow for England's individual quality to shine through that little bit more, and it just means that from a tactical point of view, a defensive point of view, and an attacking point of view, you're simplifying the game from England's perspective and allowing them to do what they do best. These are the players that I would use for England's 3-4-3 formation. We've obviously got them in a back 3, and I've had Kyle Walker as the right centre-back. I just think it seems to make sense to tuck him in as this right-sided centre-back. He was left exposed on a couple of occasions down England's right-hand side against Slovakia, so I think just tucking him in while giving him the licence and opportunity ability when he receives the ball to go and drive with it on occasion. This pushes Trent a little bit further forwards and allows for England to get up the pitch a little bit better. And I think this is a really good avenue for this England side, because it not only gives them a little bit more cover when it comes to being defensive, but at the same time it gives them a flexibility to be a little bit more offensive when they need to. John Stones in the centre of this back three. He's the best ball-playing centre-back that England have. He can find those midfielders, he can find his fellow teammates, and I think he makes the most sense to be at the heart of this England defence. As Konsa comes in for Mark Gay, he was obviously suspended. I think Konsa has a little bit more dynamism rather than Joe Gomez. I think he's got a bit more height, a bit more aerial presence about him, while also having just a little bit more pace. So I'd go with Konsa in this instant. And then we start to look at the England wing-backs. Bukayo Saka, I've moved over to the left-hand side. I think England really need to look at their left-hand side, and they need more left-sided players, left-footed players. Players who don't need to chop back in onto the right-hand side. They need players who are willing just to go on the outside. And England, frankly, don't have a lot of them. So I've put Bukayo Saka over on this left-hand side. He's defensively solid. He's very good. He's always willing to do a job for the team. And I think with him running and going down that left-hand side, it will open up a number of channels. One thing that has really been apparent when looking at Switzerland and the way that they've played in the last few games, they do stay quite narrow. And they do tuck in on occasion. And this is to stop the play through the middle of the pitch. Now, England can exploit this on occasion with Bukayo Saka making those long runs through beyond into these forward left-hand channels. And it means that Trent Alexander-Arnold has the prime opportunity, even if he was to swap with Kyle Walker on occasion, to then play those passes over to Saka. We know about those long diagonals. We know his ability to really find players who are making runs off of the ball. I think the link-up between Bukayo Saka and Trent Alexander-Arnold could be a really big one to look out for. I think Trent out on this right-hand side is a must-pick for me. He must start, and that's down to his ability to find different teammates. It's his ability to whip crosses in. He has the ability to really find different avenues, and the switch of play is always going to be something that can really hurt this Switzerland defence. And it's something that Trent does better than anyone. Not to mention the way that he delivers passes, the way that he's able to go forwards, and his link up with the likes of a Kobbie Mainoo in this inside right channel, as well as Jude Bellingham, will allow him to just progress the ball a little bit further forwards and get those crosses in. He is a must start for me and has to play. As for the front three, we've got Phil Foden, we've got Jude Bellingham and Harry Kane. Before we get to Harry Kane, we've got Phil Foden and Jude Bellingham. Gareth Southgate has had a number of conundrums and problems in trying to get both of these players onto the pitch, and I think we might have just found the solution. Both of them playing in a sort of 10 role, but also having the flexibility to drop a little bit deeper when they need to. This is something that I really want to emphasise with this England side and the way that they could be playing. Bellingham could drop a little bit deeper while Foden can go a little bit further forwards, and then the link up is going to be there. And the same can be said the other way around. Foden can drop, Bellingham can go high, you've got ability to have runners in beyond, but most importantly from a defensive aspect, I think Jude Bellingham could do a great job of stopping Granit Xhaka. Xhaka is by far and away one of Switzerland's most impactful players, and if Bellingham has his head switched on from a defensive point of view, I think he can really start to nullify that Switzerland main linchpin. And then we look at Harry Kane. Of course he's going to have difficulty against these three Switzerland centre-backs, but if he's able to drop a little bit deeper and help out with Foden and Bellingham, there are options for runs in beyond, and if he's able to get on the ball from Rice, from Mainoo, he could start to find a couple of passes. We saw him make a couple of movements in the game against Slovakia where he found Phil Foden in certain positions, where he found Kieran Trippier specifically out on this left-hand channel. I think if Kane was to drop a little bit deeper with the movement of Foden and Bellingham pulling these defenders one way, Kane could find himself in a little bit more space, and all of a sudden there might be an opportunity for a shot on goal. It all requires rotation, it all requires a good understanding of the way that they want to play, but I believe that this setup could be the way that England could beat Switzerland. And that's it, guys. That's how I believe England should set up to give themselves the best chance to beat Switzerland on Saturday. But of course, let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. How would you set up England? How do you think they're going to do on Saturday? And what do you think the score's going to be? Let me know in the comment section below. Thank you ever so much for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I hope you learned something new, and I hope to see you in the next one. But until then, my friends, take care.